I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get betrayed. Mia and I had been married for 5 years. We'd built something solid. A home, a life, and I had just landed a huge contract that could take my business to the next level. It was supposed to be our moment, the perfect time to celebrate. But lately, something felt off. Mia had become distant. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. She'd forget to text back, cancel plans last minute, or say she was working late again. When I asked what she was doing, the answers were vague, just catching up on emails, nothing important. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. We were both busy, me with a new contract, her with whatever her job had her doing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then one night, I found it. While cleaning out my email inbox, I saw a receipt from a boutique I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Your order has shipped." I figured it might have been a surprise gift, but when I opened it, I saw the items. 3 sets of expensive lingerie, the kind I'd never seen Mia wear. But that wasn't the worst part. The receipt wasn't made out to her. It was for Victor Hawk, my best friend, my business partner, the one person I trusted more than anyone else. I froze. My mind raced as I checked the payment details. It was charged to Mia's credit card. I couldn't believe it. But then, I saw the note that came with the order. For Victor. I can't wait to see you again tonight. Yours, Mia. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Mia had been sleeping with Victor. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, had betrayed me with the one person I never would have suspected. Instead of confronting her right away, I decided to wait. I wasn't going to show her how much it hurt. I wanted to make her feel the weight of her betrayal. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to make sure Victor and Mia both understood what they had done. I started making plans. The next day, I reached out to Victor and invited him out to dinner, under the guise of celebrating the new contract. He didn't suspect a thing. He agreed right away. But Mia wouldn't know about any of this. I wasn't going to confront her until I had everything in place. I wasn't about to let Mia get away with this. I had the proof, her lingerie order, the receipts, the note for Victor. But I wasn't going to confront her in some emotional outburst. No, I needed to make her feel the weight of her betrayal. The first step? Victor. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. So, I reached out to him and suggested a celebratory dinner for landing the new contract. He didn't suspect a thing. We'd known each other for years, and I figured it would be easier to confront them both together. If Mia showed up afterward, it'd be the perfect time to expose everything. The evening of the dinner, I kept my composure. Victor arrived, talking about business, joking like everything was normal. I barely heard him. All I could think about was how easy it had been for them to betray me. We ate and laughed, but it was all a facade. By the time the bill came, I had everything in place. That's when I slid the folder across the table to Victor. He glanced down at it, clearly confused. I didn't waste time. I pulled out the lingerie receipt and slid it toward him. "For you," I said flatly. "Mia bought you lingerie." Victor's face turned pale. He looked at me, then back at the receipt, but no words came. I wasn't going to let him speak. "I know about you and Mia," I said. "The late nights, the secret meetings, the lies. I know everything." I pulled out my phone and showed him the hidden camera footage. Footage of Mia and Victor, speaking to each other like I didn't exist. The intimacy, the flirtation, it was all there. Victor's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "I've got everything," I said, pulling out the flash drive. "The video, the receipts, the emails. Mia's going to see it all." I could see Victor's mind racing. He knew there was no escape. I wasn't interested in his excuses. I didn't need his apologies. The truth was already out, and now it was his turn to pay. I handed him the flash drive. "Take it," I said. "Mia's going to know everything. And when she does, so will everyone else." Victor just stared at the drive, looking like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't take it right away, but I wasn't going to rush him. I'd made sure he knew the damage was already done. I didn't say another word. I was done with him. The betrayal was complete, and I wasn't about to make it easier for him. The dinner with Victor didn't take as long as I thought. He didn't say much after I handed him the flash drive, just stared at it, his face a mix of disbelief and guilt. He looked like he wanted to run, but he didn't. Not yet. I didn't care. He'd had his shot, and now the next part of the plan was in motion. I wasn't about to waste any more time. I needed to get home and face Mia. I needed to see her react when she realized I knew everything. But before I left the restaurant, I texted her, "We need to talk when I get home. It's over." I couldn't be sure if she'd read it or not, but I didn't care. Whatever she thought was coming, it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about saving my marriage. It wasn't even about getting answers. It was about exposing her, about making sure she paid for what she did. I got home, the house eerily quiet. I don't know what I expected, but I sure didn't expect Mia to be sitting on the couch when I walked in. She looked up when I entered, and I could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the panic. She knew something was off. But she didn't know I knew the full truth. Not yet. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I didn't answer right away. I just walked over to the coffee table and set the folder down. She looked at it, but didn't pick it up. "I know about you and Victor," I said, my voice calm. Her face changed instantly, like she'd been caught mid-lie. But she still tried to cover it up. "What do you mean?" she said, her voice shaky but still trying to sound convincing. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just opened the folder and slid the receipts, the emails, the lingerie order across the table. Her eyes flicked down to them, and I could see the blood drain from her face. I didn't need to say anything else. The evidence was right there in front of her. She stammered, "Lance, this isn't what you think." "Then what is it?" I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "What's this, Mia? What do you call it? A mistake? An accident?" She tried to speak, but the words were tangled in her throat. She was caught, and I could see it in the way her hands trembled, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally said, her voice breaking. It just happened, okay? I didn't know what else to do. Victor and we've been close for a long time, and I never meant to hurt you, Lance. Please." The guilt in her voice should have made me feel something, anger, betrayal, sadness. But all I felt was cold. I wasn't here to listen to her excuses. I wasn't here to make sense of her lies. I was done. I stood up and walked over to her, holding out the flash drive with the video, the emails, everything. "This is for you," I said. "You're going to watch it. And when you're done, you'll know everything." Her eyes were wide, but she didn't take it right away. "Lance, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. Please, we can fix this." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You've lost everything. This is over." I wasn't going to let her talk me into another lie. I wasn't going to fall for her pleas. She had made her choice, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I wasn't going to be the one who walked away with nothing. I left her standing there, clutching the flash drive, her face pale and crumpled. I didn't stay around to see Mia's reaction. I knew what it would be: shock, guilt, denial, but it didn't matter. The truth was in front of her, and nothing would change that. She could beg, cry, whatever. It was over. That night, I went to bed with my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about Victor, wondering when he'd try to reach out. Sure enough, by mid-morning, I had a message from him. "We need to talk, Lance." I didn't respond. He'd made his choices. I wasn't interested in hearing him justify his actions or beg for forgiveness. I already knew what he was capable of, and I wasn't about to let him manipulate me. I didn't tell Mia about the message. She had enough of her own mess to deal with. I had mine. But I realized something. I wasn't done. Confronting them wasn't enough. I needed the world to know what they had done. Mia hadn't just hurt me. She had embarrassed me. She needed to face the consequences publicly. It wasn't just about our marriage anymore. It was about making sure the truth came to light. So, I called a reporter I knew from a tech blog. We'd worked together on a few projects before, and I knew he could be trusted to get the story out there. I wasn't trying to make a huge spectacle, but I wanted people to know. I told him the basics. How my wife had been having an affair with my business partner, Victor. That was it. Just enough to get the ball rolling. By the time the article went live, I was a mix of nervous and relieved. It wasn't a huge scandal yet, but it was enough. Mia would see it. Victor would see it. And everyone they knew would see it, too. I knew it would hurt them both in ways nothing else could. That afternoon, I got a call from Victor. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I already knew what was coming. Mia, however, was waiting for me when I got home. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at me with a mix of guilt and fear. But I wasn't about to let her off easy. I just looked at her and said, "I told you it was over. There's nothing more to say." She didn't beg. She didn't try to explain. Maybe she knew it was pointless. I didn't care. The damage was done, and I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing it. The next few days were a blur. Mia and I barely spoke. She spent most of her time pacing around the house, constantly checking her phone, waiting for the fallout. I knew she was hoping for some miracle, maybe a way to fix everything, but there was no saving what was already broken. I didn't need to look at her to know the pressure was getting to her. The article had spread faster than I expected. It wasn't just the local blog anymore. People at work were talking. I heard rumors from mutual friends and colleagues. Mia and Victor had become the talk of the town. No matter how hard they tried to cover it up, everyone knew. They were both living in their own personal hell. I wasn't sure what Victor's next move would be. The article hit him hard. He called once, then twice, but I ignored every message. He was scrambling. I could tell. He was probably trying to save his reputation, maybe even his job. I wasn't interested in helping him out of this. He could figure it out the way I had to. Face the music. Mia, on the other hand, was a different story. She couldn't ignore it. I knew her too well. She would have preferred it if everything had stayed hidden, tucked away in the dark. But now that the truth was out there, she had no choice but to face the consequences. One morning, she came to me, her voice trembling. "Lance, please," she said, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. But you have to believe me, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't want this to happen." I looked at her, the woman I'd trusted with my life. The woman I'd spent 5 years building a future with. I could see how hard this was for her, but the truth was, I didn't care. She had made her choice. And now, I was the one who had to pick up the pieces. "You think I care about your apologies, Mia?" I said, my voice cold. "It's over. You made your bed. Now you're going to lie in it." She looked like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care anymore. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. She had to understand that her actions had consequences. She didn't get to ruin everything for me and just expect things to go back to normal. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure that neither Mia nor Victor could walk away from this mess and pretend nothing had happened. They both had to own up to the damage they'd caused. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Mia. It was simple, just a single line. "I'm leaving. I can't stay here." I didn't respond. I knew this was coming. She couldn't handle the pressure. She couldn't stand being in the same house as me, knowing everything she'd done was laid out for the world to see. Part of me wanted to feel something, regret, sadness, relief, maybe. But all I felt was a strange calmness, like I was finally free. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to wonder if I was enough for her. I knew the truth now, and that was all that mattered. Mia packed her things that evening. I didn't help. I didn't offer her any words of comfort. She was walking out of my life, and I wasn't about to make it easier for her. When she left, she didn't even look back. Mia's departure was almost too quiet. One day, she was there, the next, she was gone. No drama, no pleading, just a few bags packed and the front door closing behind her. I didn't feel relief. Not exactly. I had expected a bigger emotional response, something to mark the end of everything we had built together. But it didn't come. Instead, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The house felt emptier, colder. The following days were a strange mix of silence and noise. I spent a lot of time at work, throwing myself into tasks, drowning out the emptiness at home. I knew the end was inevitable, but now that Mia was gone, I had to figure out what to do with the mess she left behind. Victor didn't reach out again. Maybe he was still reeling from the article, or maybe he just didn't know what to say. I knew he had a family too. He probably didn't want to risk losing it all over a fling. But I wasn't about to go easy on him either. I wasn't done with him. About a week after Mia left, I got a message from Victor. This time, it wasn't just a text. He called, and I picked up. "Lance," he started, his voice shaky. "I owe you an apology. For everything. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was stupid, and I don't know what else to say." I let him ramble for a while, trying to say all the right things, but I wasn't buying any of it. He was trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. He wanted to be the good guy. But he wasn't the good guy. He was just another man who thought he could get away with betrayal. "I don't want your apology, Victor," I said, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in your excuses." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him taking a breath, maybe even trying to prepare for what was coming. "I know what we did was wrong," he said quietly. "But I thought maybe we could work things out. You know, try to fix it." "Fix it?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think you can fix this? You can't fix betrayal. You can't fix a lie like that." Victor didn't say anything. He was quiet for a moment, and for a second, I wondered if he realized the full extent of what he had done. I wasn't interested in fixing anything with him. He and Mia had wrecked everything between us, and I wasn't going to be the one to clean up their mess. "Listen," I said, my voice hardening, "I'm done. You both made your choices. You're not going to get to walk away from this with no consequences. You've ruined everything, and I won't pretend it didn't happen." Another long pause. I could hear him breathing, probably gathering the courage to say something that would make everything better. But it wouldn't. It was too late for that. "I get it," he finally said. "But Lance, just know I never meant to hurt you." "Then you should have thought of that before you slept with my wife," I replied flatly. He didn't respond. And I didn't care. I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I wasn't interested in making peace. There was nothing to salvage here. I ended the call without saying another word. That night, as I sat in the silence of the house, I felt the weight of it all. The betrayal, the loss, the anger. But I also felt something else. A strange sense of closure. It was over. Mia was gone. Victor was out of my life. I didn't have to keep pretending everything was fine. The truth had come out, and now it was time to move forward. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it would be better than living a lie. The days after Mia left were strange. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It took time to adjust to being alone, but I knew I had to rebuild. I threw myself into work more than ever, taking on more clients, staying late, and even picking up old side projects. It kept me busy, and kept my mind off the empty space Mia had left behind. I didn't miss her the way I thought I would. I'd expected anger, maybe sadness, but instead I felt a strange emptiness. It was like carrying a weight for years, and once it was gone, I could finally breathe. The silence was overwhelming, but it was also a relief. Still, there were moments when it hit me, like when I found an old picture of us, smiling from a time when things seemed perfect. It stung for a second, but I didn't dwell on it. I flipped the picture over, and that was that. I didn't need reminders of a life that wasn't mine anymore. I started focusing on myself again. I worked out, ate better, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with while I was wrapped up in my marriage. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for me, not for someone else. One evening, a guy from work invited me to a poker game. I figured it'd be good to get out of the house, so I went. That's where I met Sarah. She was smart, funny, and didn't know me as Mia's husband or Victor's business partner. She just knew me as Lance. It felt good to be seen for who I was again, not just the guy who had been betrayed. We started talking after the games, and I began to enjoy the conversations, the lightness of it all. I wasn't ready to date, but Sarah was a reminder that life didn't have to be all about the past. There was still a world out there waiting, even if it wasn't perfect. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't broken. But even as I started to move on, Mia and Victor were never far from my thoughts. Every time I saw a couple, laughing or holding hands, I'd think about how easily they destroyed everything. But I wasn't going to let that ruin me. I wasn't going to let anyone ever make me feel small or disposable again. This was my life now, and I was determined to live it on my terms. It's strange how things change when you're forced to rebuild. At first, everything felt like I was just going through the motions. But slowly, I started realizing that I didn't need to rebuild everything from scratch. I could keep parts of my old life, just reframe them, make them work for me now. That's when I started to think about my business more seriously. Victor wasn't there to take half of what I built, and Mia wasn't there to distract me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control of my future. I focused on growing the company, even taking on some bigger contracts I'd been putting off. I still didn't want to deal with Victor, but I had to. Our company was intertwined too tightly for me to ignore him completely. I began making moves to buy him out of the business. It wasn't about getting revenge or rubbing his face in it. It was just about closing the door on that chapter, once and for all. Victor didn't take the news well. I could see it in his eyes when I told him. He tried to stall, tried to negotiate for a better deal, but I wasn't having it. I had no interest in saving him, and I made it clear. You had your chance, Victor, I said, leaning across the table. You lost the right to any favor I had. His expression shifted from anger to desperation, but I didn't budge. After everything, I wasn't going to let him hold anything over me. I was done. And that final transaction felt like cutting a last string, severing the tie that had bound me to him. Mia, on the other hand, seemed to be spiraling even faster. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I didn't expect to. But one evening, she called me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't anything I wanted to hear. I'm so sorry for what I did, Lance, she said, her voice cracking. I never meant for it to end like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I almost laughed. Really? Because that's exactly what you did. You hurt me, you hurt yourself, and you hurt Victor in the end. You've ruined everything. She cried on the other end of the line, but I couldn't feel anything for her anymore. No sympathy. No regret. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I ended the call quickly. There was no point in dragging it out. The Mia I had once known was gone. In her place was someone I didn't even recognize. A few days later, I found out from a mutual friend that Mia had moved in with some guy she had been seeing while we were still married. I wasn't surprised, but part of me felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She wasn't winning. Not anymore. I didn't think much about Victor or Mia after that. They were both a part of my past, and I wasn't going to let them have any more space in my future. The business was growing. I had more freedom. I was meeting new people, reconnecting with old friends. I wasn't perfect, and I still had scars from what happened, but I was no longer defined by what they had done to me. After Mia's call, everything felt quieter. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a deep, quiet relief, like the storm had passed, and now I was standing in calm. Work was booming. I threw myself into it, pushing harder than ever, and for the first time in years, I had no distractions. The projects I had put on hold were finally taking off, and I felt like I was in control of everything again. Still, a part of me wasn't fully free. Mia and Victor were out there, living their lives, and I couldn't help but feel that some loose ends still needed tying up. That's when Sarah reached out. It had been a few months since we'd met at the poker game. We hadn't seen each other much, but this time, she invited me to dinner. We talked about life, work, random stuff, and by the end of the night, we stood by my car, a little awkward. She hugged me, and in that moment, she whispered something that stuck with me. You're not broken, Lance. You've got a lot of good things ahead of you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I believed I was broken, that the betrayal had shattered something inside of me. But Sarah saw me differently. She didn't see me as the victim. She saw me as me, and maybe that was the first real step in healing. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more. We went out for dinners, talked about everything under the sun. There was no pressure, no expectations, just simple companionship. I wasn't sure where it would go, but it felt good to feel something again. For the first time in a while, I wasn't stuck in the past. I still thought about Mia and Victor now and then. Mia had moved on, and I heard through a friend that she was living with a guy she'd been seeing while we were still married. I didn't care. She wasn't my problem anymore. Victor, however, still posted business updates on social media, pretending everything was fine. I didn't feel anger anymore, just indifference. He was a part of my past, and I was done with him. The truth was, moving on wasn't easy. Some days, I'd feel that familiar ache of betrayal. But more often than not, I'd look around at the life I was building, my career, my freedom, and realize that I was better than my past. I wasn't defined by their mistakes. I was defined by mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I was becoming. The more time passed, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to things that weren't mine to carry. I had spent too long thinking about Mia and Victor, trying to make sense of it all. But the truth was, the past was gone, and it wasn't going to change. I had to stop living in it and start living for the future. I was still seeing Sarah, and things between us were easy. There were no games, no pretending. She didn't try to fix me or make me forget about the past. She just was. And that was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I felt like I was in a relationship where I could just be myself. There was no weight, no pressure. It was a fresh start, and even though I wasn't rushing into anything, I felt a quiet excitement. One evening, Sarah invited me over to her place for dinner. It was casual, just the two of us, some wine and conversation. We didn't talk about the past, or my marriage, or anything heavy. We just shared a moment together, something simple and real. At the end of the night, when I was leaving, she looked at me with that quiet, knowing smile of hers. "I'm glad you're doing better, Lance. You've been through a lot, but I can see you're moving forward." Her words felt like a weight lifted. I didn't have to carry around the anger or the regret anymore. I could just move forward. And maybe, just maybe, there was something better waiting for me. The next week, I met with my lawyer to finalize the buyout of Victor's stake in the business. We were so close to finishing everything, and I couldn't wait to be done with him, once and for all. The deal was mostly formalities at this point, but I still couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I signed the final papers. Victor tried reaching out once more, trying to make peace, trying to act like everything could go back to normal, but I was done. I didn't need his friendship, his apology, or anything from him anymore. I was building something on my own now. A few days after the deal was closed, Mia called again. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain herself, she said. I almost didn't pick up, but for some reason, I did. "Lance," she started, "I know I hurt you, but I need you to understand. It wasn't just about Victor. It was my fault too. I made so many mistakes. I listened. I didn't say much. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just detached." "You don't owe me an explanation, Mia," I said calmly. "I'm past it. I've moved on." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that surprised me. "I'm sorry, Lance. I really am. I didn't feel anything. No anger, no relief. Just the recognition that I had no more space for her in my life." I ended the call. I didn't need closure, not from her. I had my own closure, and it was enough. As I hung up, I realized something. Mia and Victor might have been a part of my past, but they weren't the story anymore. I was writing my own. And for the first time, I could see the pages ahead of me, full of possibility. The days began to blend together, not in a bad way, but in a comfortable, steady rhythm. My life was no longer this constant fight between past and present. It felt like I was truly living again, focusing on my work, spending time with Sarah, and even starting to enjoy my own company again. It was around this time that something unexpected happened. I ran into Victor. I was out for a coffee, taking a break from a busy morning, when I saw him across the street, walking toward me. I'd been avoiding him for so long, trying to keep him and Mia out of my head, but there he was, still trying to pretend like things were fine. He looked tired. His usual cocky demeanor was gone. He looked smaller somehow, less confident. As he got closer, I could see the tension in his posture, like he was gearing up for some kind of confrontation. I didn't feel anger though, just a kind of emptiness. He stopped in front of me, looking a little unsure of himself. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "I guess this is it, huh?" Victor said finally, breaking the silence. "You're done with me, aren't you?" I could have let him have it. Could have reminded him of everything he did to me, to Mia, to our friendship. But I didn't feel like playing that game anymore. I'd already won. "I'm not mad at you, Victor," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just done. We're done. I don't have space for you in my life anymore." Victor opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but then just let out a long sigh. He wasn't the same guy who had been so smug when all this started. The guy who thought everything was just a game. "You're right," he said quietly. "I messed up. Big time." There was a small, almost imperceptible shift in his voice, something that told me he wasn't trying to make excuses anymore. He was owning it. For a moment, I thought about what it would feel like to get some sort of closure from him. To hear him apologize properly. To finally hear him say the words that might make me feel like I could put everything to rest. But then I realized, I didn't need that from him. I'd already let go. "Yeah," I said, shaking my head, "you really did. But it's not my problem anymore." Victor nodded slowly, taking the words in. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me otherwise. "Good luck with everything, Lance," he said, a bit more sincerely than I expected. "You too," I replied, turning to leave. As I walked away, I felt nothing but relief. The last real tie to that part of my life had just been severed. No more Victor. No more Mia. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their approval. I had my own life now, and I was finally living it for myself. After the encounter with Victor, I thought I'd feel something more, resentment, anger, even relief. But I didn't. I felt free. It was like the weight of that old life had been lifted off me. There were no loose ends, no unfinished business with him. He'd had his chance, and now I was done. Life moved on. Sarah and I were spending more time together, and things were easy between us. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet connection that felt right. She wasn't asking me to rush into anything, and I wasn't ready to. But there was something about the way she made me feel, like I wasn't defined by the past anymore, like I could just be me. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Work was thriving too. With Victor out of the picture, the business was mine in every sense. There were no more compromises, no more second-guessing decisions. I was moving forward, focusing on growth, on innovation. It was exhilarating, the sense that everything I was doing was for me. No distractions, no doubts. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice something. The more I moved forward, the more I realized how many people had fallen out of my life. Mia, Victor, even old friends who had quietly drifted away after everything had gone down. They'd all made their choices, and I had made mine. But sometimes, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. One evening, I found myself sitting at a bar with an old acquaintance from my pre-Mia days. His name was Mark, someone I'd known back when everything was still simple, when I wasn't weighed down by betrayal and deceit. We talked about the old times, about the stuff that used to matter. I realized how much I missed having genuine connections with people who didn't know the messy parts of my life. People who just knew me. That night, Mark said something that stuck with me. "You know, Lance," he said, tapping his beer bottle, "you always had your shit together. Even back then. Whatever happened with Mia. I don't know the details, but I can tell it took a toll. But don't forget, you're not just the guy who got hurt. You're the guy who came out on top. Don't let anyone forget that." His words felt like a punch in the gut, but in a good way. They reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that I was more than just the guy who got betrayed. I was the guy who kept going, kept fighting. I was the guy who would build something better out of the wreckage. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't a victim, and I wasn't someone who'd just fade into the background. I was still Lance Draven, and I was going to make sure the world remembered that. Months passed, and life had settled into a new rhythm. My work was thriving, and Sarah and I were growing closer. There was no rush to move things forward, just simple, comfortable time together. But a part of me still held back, not ready to dive into anything too serious. Then, one day, I got a text from Mia. It had been months since we'd last spoken, and her message was simple. "Lance, I need to talk. Can we meet?" I almost ignored it. There was nothing left to say to her. But curiosity nagged at me, and I agreed to meet. We met at a quiet coffee shop. Mia was already there, sitting alone. She didn't look like the confident woman I remembered. Her face was soft, tired, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "Hey," I said, trying to keep things neutral. Mia didn't look up right away. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, voice quiet. "I hurt you. It wasn't just about Victor. It was about me, my insecurities. I ran away from my problems, and I hurt you in the process." I listened. There was no anger in me, just quiet acceptance. She was being honest, or at least trying to be. "I've been in therapy, trying to fix myself. But I don't expect you to forgive me or want anything to do with me. I just needed you to know. I regret it. Every day." I took a long breath. I wasn't angry, but I also wasn't looking for some grand apology. I'd moved on. "Mia," I said slowly, "I'm glad you're working on yourself. But that part of my life is over. You weren't the problem. I was. I let you control my happiness for too long. I won't let anyone do that again." She looked at me, as if waiting for more. I didn't have anything else to say. "I'm not angry. But I'm not going back," I continued. "This is where we end." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. But I didn't feel pity, just calm. "I'm not the same guy I was before, Mia," I added, standing up. "And I'm not holding on to any of this anymore." As I turned to leave, she called my name. "Lance, I'll always care about you. I wish I'd been better for you." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was already walking away. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. After that meeting with Mia, I felt something inside me shift. The weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying, the remnants of her of the past, was finally gone. Walking away from her wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about fully letting go of everything I'd once thought I needed. Life was different now. I didn't spend my nights lying awake, replaying old conversations or wondering what I could have done differently. I didn't even think about Victor anymore. He was gone from my life, and as much as I hated what he did, I realized I was better off without him too. They were both part of a past that no longer had any hold over me. Sarah and I had grown closer, but I still kept things slow. She didn't pressure me. She understood. There was no expectation, just a quiet, steady companionship that felt like exactly what I needed. She wasn't trying to heal me, and I wasn't trying to fill any empty space. We were just together, and that felt like enough. I still thought about the future, what it would look like, what I wanted it to be. I knew I wanted something real, but not rushed. My past had taught me not to jump into things without taking my time. I wanted to build something that wasn't based on need, but on mutual respect, trust, and love. If Sarah was part of that, great. If not, I'd be okay. Work was going well. With Victor completely out of the picture, I was finally free to steer the company in the direction I wanted. There were no more compromises. No more wondering if Victor was going to pull the rug out from under me or try to manipulate a situation. It was mine, and I could do whatever I wanted with it. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office, just going over some new business projections, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old friend I hadn't seen in years, someone I used to work with back before the mess with Mia and Victor. His name was Greg. "Hey, Lance. Been a while. How about we catch up over drinks? I'd like to hear what you've been up to." It was an unexpected message, but I was surprised by how much I wanted to reply. I hadn't really thought about reconnecting with people from before everything went wrong, but here was someone who only knew the old me, the one who wasn't carrying around the weight of betrayal. I texted back, agreeing to meet up. When we met at a bar that weekend, it was like stepping back in time. We talked about work, old memories, mutual friends. It felt good. The conversation was easy. There was no baggage between us, no need for explanations or awkward pauses. I could just be me again. At some point, Greg said something that made me pause. "You've really turned things around, man. You're not the same guy you were when I last saw you. It's like you've found your rhythm again." I smiled, feeling a quiet pride I hadn't realized I was missing. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "I've learned a lot the past couple of years. And it wasn't easy. But I'm finally at peace." Greg raised his glass. "Here's to that, then. To peace." And in that moment, I realized that's exactly what I had. Peace. I wasn't fighting battles anymore. I wasn't stuck in the past, holding on to old grudges or broken dreams. I was living for the future, whatever it might be. It had been a year since everything fell apart. A year since Mia and Victor's betrayal shattered my world. A year since I made the decision to stop letting the past define me. And now, here I was, looking at life from a different angle, not through the lens of betrayal and pain, but through the lens of possibility. I wasn't the same man I had been a year ago. Not even close. I'd rebuilt myself, brick by brick, from the wreckage they'd left behind. And while I would never forget what happened, I realized something important. The past doesn't have to be a cage. I didn't have to keep reliving it. I didn't have to let their mistakes shape who I was. I could choose to leave it behind. Sarah and I were still together, and while we hadn't rushed into anything serious, I felt comfortable with her. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried. She wasn't Mia. She wasn't Victor. She wasn't a reminder of everything I'd lost. She was simply Sarah, a person who made me laugh, who didn't try to fix me, but who was there for me when I needed it. We spent weekends exploring new places, talking about things that had nothing to do with the past. I'd tell her about the things that had inspired me in my work, and she'd talk about her dreams, no matter how big or small. There was no pressure, no expectations, just us. And that was all I needed. But there was one more thing I needed to do. A final step in closing the chapter for good. One afternoon, I got a call from an old colleague, someone from the tech world who I'd worked with before everything fell apart. He offered me a deal, a huge opportunity, the kind that could change everything for my company. It was a project I'd been dreaming of for years but had never been able to pursue because of the distractions in my life. The project was a game changer. And as I sat there, looking at the numbers and the possibilities, I realized that this was it. The final step in my reinvention. I was no longer the guy who had been hurt, who had been betrayed. I was the guy who was going to take this opportunity and run with it. I called Sarah to tell her the news. "I'm in," I said, my voice full of excitement. "I knew you'd be," she replied, her voice warm. "You've always had that drive, Lance." And in that moment, I knew I was ready to fully embrace whatever came next. I wasn't defined by the mistakes of others. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I chose to do now. The future was mine.